So now let's peer into the pyramid at the cellular level. I love these biological analogies, seem to be pretty popular these days. So we're going to go over Business 101, which really is Business 01. This is the stuff that is really obvious, that is so unpalatable they don't want to teach you this at school. But it's really the way the organism works at the cellular level, the way decisions are really made. So what is the number one rule in business? People are fundamentally selfish. Nothing wrong with that. It's human nature. Number two rule in business, the higher you go, the more selfish they are. This is pretty obvious stuff. But the key is to remember this always. So for example, when you're going to sell something to somebody, don't explain why it's good for the company, explain why it's good for them. Things like that. So let's try to understand, what does it mean to be selfish? Well, people always say to me, people aren't really that selfish. They want to help. People aren't, you're cynical and things like that. There's a difference between saying you want to do something and actually doing it. So it really comes down to something very important, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so let me review that real quickly. The idea is if your basic needs are met, you're less likely to be selfish in your actions, not in your thoughts, in your actions. So the problem is that the fat, dumb, and happy model that we live in has elevated that level of basic needs very, very high. So we're never satisfied. We're a bunch of addicts. So which actually works very well for keeping our pyramid stable. And so nothing wrong with that, but the idea is to remember that people are in denial about their selfishness. They claim that they want to help and they don't want to behave in a way that's overly selfish, but in reality their behavior at a subconscious level is what really drives them. And so it's very important to understand that. So if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a classic pyramid. Pyramids appearing everywhere, it seems. So at the lowest level, your physiological level, the idea here is that these needs must be met first. The ones at the bottom must be met first, like the foundation. Breathing, food, water, and incidentally sex, not love, sex, must be met for you then to go to the next level, to then worry about safety. Then the next level is love and belonging and esteem and so on. So as you go up the pyramid, the idea there is until you reach a certain minimal level of self-esteem, you're going to tend to be pretty selfish. You really can't help other people. You say you can help other people. You go through the motions, but in reality, when the rubber hits the road, when you're sitting there trying to make a decision, you're going to be selfish, despite what you say. So people are in denial about their selfish behavior, and this is around us all the time. And we try not to think about it too much, but if you look at Carl Jung, a brilliant man, really illustrated the human race with one of his sayings, is that people basically are the opposite of what they claim to be. Very often the world is upside down. Everything is exactly the opposite of what it appears to be. And you can take that rule and apply it over and over again in situations all the time. Let me give you some examples. Moral people often are not. Religious and spiritual people often are selfish. They're really focused on feeling good, following the rules. People who are homophobic are often turned on by gay sex. Leaders who are here to help us. Of course, we all know that one. And we also know that there's a lot of other leaders and people who are supposed to be of service who are really focused on themselves. And again, look at teachers. A lot of teachers really want to help the students. There's also a lot of teachers who think they want to help the students, and their idea of helping them is making them pass a test, making them follow directions. The teacher's really focused on themselves. Whereas in education, the relationship between the teacher and the student is the most important part of education, and most people don't focus on. Parents are often focused on making themselves look good. They want their kids to get good grades. They want them to have fancy clothes so they feel like they're providing for their children, and so on. And of course, politicians and executives, we all know that story. And so thinking about that, let's think about another important rule of business, which is marketing. We live in a perceptual world. $1.99 seems less than $2. If that's any proof that we live in a perceptual world, it's the constant 99 cents that you always see. So there's two kinds of marketing people, those who exaggerate and those who lie. It's only a matter of degree. Lying is just an excessive exaggeration. And if you remember, in the way that we structure the pyramid, the way that we structure organizations, we have silos. We have the marketing people over here and the product people over there, and they don't talk to each other, and that is by design, by the way. And so the idea is that if marketing people don't understand the details of the product, it's much, much easier to sell it. You don't want engineers sailing because they're going to tell the truth. You need to exaggerate. And so it's very important to understand that because most businesses operate at this level. You see marketing slogans. They have nothing whatsoever to do with reality. And even if I didn't want to exaggerate, I'd go out of business if I didn't. Everybody else is doing it. If everybody else is doing it, it becomes a matter of competitive necessity. And so it's easier, the rewards are greater, it's natural, and that's why we end up in a situation where people go down the path of exaggerated marketing. So the question is, aren't you going to get caught? Well, yes, it depends. So what's happening is your inclination to exaggerate is really depending on what is the probability of getting caught, what's the cost of failure, what's your ability to blame it on somebody else, do you have a short-term or long-term horizon, what's your ability to claim ignorance, and things of that nature. So what determines that? Well, it's really what's determining that is who you are and the market that you're in. So when we are deciding who to put in a company, the kind of person we want, we have to be clear, do we want, to borrow an expression from Ayn Rand, the book Atlas Shrugged, do we want a looter or do we want a producer? What is the difference? Well, a producer is somebody who's focused on making the pie bigger. They're somebody who's driven by passion. They're very competent. They're very creative. Whereas a looter is somebody who's focused on stealing a piece of pie instead of making the pie bigger because it's just easier. And this started way back in our days when we moved from hunter-gatherers to cultivation. It was easier to steal somebody's animal than to cultivate your own. It's very natural. It's very natural in the world. And so we're not here to judge who's a looter, who's a producer, and why, and is it moral and ethical. People are the way they are. Again, this is the point of leverage. We take what already exists and we recognize there's two kinds of people, and sometimes we need looters and sometimes we need producers. And so it's very, very important, especially in the senior management positions.